Hey guys, tonight we're time traveling back to the Middle Ages, a land of cobblestone streets, suspicious stew, and an absolutely exhausting list of rules about when, how, and why you were allowed to get frisky. Right now, you're curled beneath a wool blanket stuffed with straw, listening to the soft patter of rain on a thatched roof. You can smell old wood smoke, damp linen, and just faintly the odor of your neighbor's goat. It's not romantic, it's real, and as you shift on the hard mattress, maybe wondering what the people of this sleepy village got up to when the sun went down, let me warn you, it wasn't much. Not legally, anyway, because believe it or not, medieval Europe had a schedule for sex. Not just a general vibe of conservatism, but a full-on liturgical calendar of when you were and were not allowed to do the deed. You probably won't survive this, not because it's dangerous, but because it's just so spiritually exhausting. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You start the day with chores. You clean the hearth, sweep the rushes, and mutter about the pigeons in the rafters. Your spouse, or the person you've been quietly betrothed to since age 12, helps you repair a fence. It's cold, your knees ache, but you're looking forward to one small thing tonight: privacy. Just a little closeness, a little warmth under the blanket, a little sin, except it's Thursday. And in the medieval world, Thursday was sometimes off limits for physical affection. In fact, depending on the region and era, sex was forbidden on Fridays, Saturdays, Sundays, Wednesdays, during Lent, during Advent, on fast days, feast days, and any day remotely connected to a saint, martyr, or celestial body. At one point, there were allegedly over 100 days per year where intimacy was religiously banned. And that's before we count the days you were just too tired from plowing the fields. Historians still argue whether these rules were widely enforced or mostly symbolic. But church doctrine was clear. Sex wasn't sinful if it was between married people, for procreation only in the missionary position, and on an approved date. That's a lot of asterisks. It's worth noting that many peasants couldn't read these rules. They learned them through gossip, scolding sermons, and the occasional bishop's visit. A friar might waggle his finger in the town square and announce, "No coupling on St. Blaise's Eve," and you'd nod solemnly, pretending you hadn't just done exactly that behind the pigsty last night. There were exceptions, of course. Newlyweds often got a grace period. Sometimes indulgent priests would overlook private lapses. And of course, people broke the rules constantly. But the anxiety was there. You couldn't help but feel it, that holy pressure hanging over your hay-stuffed mattress. That creeping dread that even one badly timed kiss could offend not just your neighbor, but God. And yet, you tried. You navigated it. lit a candle in secret. You whispered apologies to Saint Gertrude. You tried to love and laugh and find small comforts in a world that insisted passion was peril. So, when night finally falls and you lie beside the person who's seen you without shoes, you touch fingers under the blanket, just fingertips, just permission. And maybe it's Thursday, and maybe it's wrong, but for one breath you feel warm. And in this cold, candlelit world, that's enough. You wake up to the sound of church bells. Again, it's not even sunrise, but Brother Ulrich is already at it, ringing that heavy bronze bell with all the enthusiasm of a man who's never had a lion. The sound vibrates through your wooden shutters and into your molars, and with it comes the reminder, today is a holy day. Again, you sit up, stretch, and reach for your homespun tunic, woven so thick it feels like wearing a doormat. As you lace up your boots, you hear it from the next room, your spouse sighing, not from sleep, but from resignation. Because it's Saint Eustace's feast day. And Saint Eustace, for reasons known only to long-dead theologians, would rather you abstain. And let's be clear, it's not just his day. It's also Saint Agatha's, depending on the region. And there's debate about whether the vigil of the feast counts too. Historians still argue whether some medieval calendars padded the restrictions just to cover their ecclesiastical backsides. Better safe than sorry was practically canon law. But you're feeling defiant. After all, the livestock don't stop mating. The birds in the trees don't skip a beat. Even the town's alley cat, whose nocturnal howls haunt your dreams, doesn't seem particularly moved by the sanctity of Saint Eustace. Still, the rules weren't designed with logic in mind. They were about order, purity, control. If everyone just followed their feelings, well, what's next? Dancing on Sundays. You slip outside for water. The morning fog clings to the ground, hiding the ruts in the road. A milkmaid passes by, eyes down, veil crooked, humming a hymn you vaguely recognize. Her cheeks are red from the cold, or embarrassment maybe. Last week, she was called before the local priest for smiling too often at the blacksmith's apprentice. Apparently, joy is also suspicious. You nod politely, then pump the well. The bucket creaks, and as you watch the ripples settle, you think about the other rules. Rules for married couples. Rules for widows. Rules for anyone whose body occasionally rebelled against monastic ideals. There were guidelines on how often you could be intimate. Some medieval theologians said once a week was acceptable. Others, bolder, holier, possibly less fun, suggested once a month. Or only on the night you plan to conceive, or better yet, never, unless an angel explicitly gave you a thumbs up. And those were the merciful views. In the harsher corners of Christendom, passion itself was branded a sin, even within marriage. A weakness, something you confessed in whispers while kneeling on cold stone floors. The word lust wasn't saved for lechery. It applied to anything that felt too good, even holding hands too long. even laughing too hard. But here's the strange part. Despite all these restrictions, love still found its way in. Lovers passed notes beneath chapel benches. Husbands carved hearts into barn beams. Wives tucked herbs under pillows to stir up a little excitement on saint-approved nights. There's a charm in the rebellion, like two people playing a secret game against a stacked deck. A shared wink beneath layers of linen and doctrine. Back inside, the fire's gone out. You huddle under the covers again, legs brushing by accident, then on purpose. You whisper, "Do you think Saint Eustace would mind?" A grin, a shrug, a conspiratorial glance toward the rafters, and then a sneeze from the loft. Your mother-in-law is awake, and tonight, Saint Eustace wins. You head to the town square after chores, mostly because it's market day, and partly because your neighbor's goat is testing your last nerve. The cobblestones are slick from yesterday's drizzle, and your boots slap wetly as you pass the fishmonger, the baker, and a very stern-looking nun selling holy medals carved from turnips. Yes, really. They don't last long in soup. Over near the church steps, a crowd has gathered. That usually means one of two things. Someone's getting married, or someone's getting punished. Today, it's both. The bride is 17, blushing under her linen veil, and the groom is old enough to remember when the well was just a hole in the ground. But he's got land, 2 goats, and a cousin who's friends with the bishop. So love finds a way. Next to the couple stands a young woman with shorn hair and wrists bound with rope. Her crime: allegedly sharing a hayloft with a mason's apprentice during Lent. There are no witnesses, just suspicions, and a few conveniently timed barn noises. Still, the priest is making an example. You watch as he lectures her, waving a copy of the Penitential of Theodore, which outlines, often in excruciating detail, what kind of sins warrant how many lashes. Did you know there was once a rule that said you owed 3 years of penance for kissing a nun with evil intent? Even longer if you had a beard. Apparently, facial hair is spiritually destabilizing. Historians still argue whether local priests truly enforced these rules or just used them when they needed leverage. But their existence meant people policed themselves, thought twice, confessed often. You pass a boy drawing obscene stick figures in the mud. His mother clouts him on the head and says, "That's how the devil finds your hand." The boy looks smug. The devil, it seems, is a fan of crude doodles. You make your way to the bread stall, but the gossip follows you. Someone murmurs about a midwife who knows too much. Another claims the miller's wife was seen buying foreign spices, code, perhaps, for aphrodisiacs. Truth is, medieval love was laced with suspicion. Anything natural desire, affection, curiosity was dangerous when viewed through the church's smoky lens. The safest love was whispered. The safest touch was brief, and so lovers became codebreakers. They found ways to say, "I want you," without saying a word. A carved spoon, a length of ribbon, a pressed flower tucked inside a psalm book. If someone handed you a sprig of rosemary, it wasn't for seasoning stew. Back home, you sit by the hearth and slice the day's loaf with a dagger. The fire crackles. Your spouse is spinning wool, humming a tune you half recognize. You glance at them, and the weight of the day's rules slips a little. Maybe tomorrow is a safe day. Maybe you'll light a candle anyway. And maybe, just maybe, you'll risk it, because in a world so tangled with warnings, even a shared smile feels like a revolution. You rise early again, this time to find the village bathed in a soft morning mist. The roosters are confused, crowing at nothing. Your joints creak as you step outside. But it's not the cold that startles you. It's the sudden clang of metal on stone. Across the lane, a group of young men is dragging a wooden frame into the square. You squint. Ah, the stalks. Someone's been caught, and it's barely dawn. Turns out it's the baker's daughter. And her crime, bathing nude in the river on a Wednesday. Scandalous. Now, to be clear, she was alone behind the reeds, and no one would have known if the Reeves' son hadn't been accidentally fishing nearby with eyes like saucers and a mouth full of gossip. And yet here she is, head lowered, hair damp, being lectured by the parish constable. You can't help but sigh, because this is one of those unspoken rules. Everyone bathes in the river, but heaven forbid you do it at the wrong time or with the wrong mood. The church claimed cleanliness was next to godliness unless you enjoyed it. Then it was practically a gateway sin. Historians still argue whether public punishments were more about control or community theater. The line was blurry. After all, the same villagers who tisk-tisked the poor girl would later be seen smirking behind their tankards at the tavern. You wander on, thinking of the many other hidden rules. For example, did you know that certain foods were believed to encourage lust? Garlic, eggs, even peas. Yes, peas. A bishop once warned that excessive legume consumption might lead to impure dreams. As you pass the apothecary's hut, the old widow who runs it gives you a wink. She sells herbs to help with sleep, but the side effects are marital. Her dried sachets are popular among newlyweds and nervously giggling shepherds. Back in your cottage, you sit by the small, soot-darkened window, turning a carved comb-over in your hands. It was a gift from someone years ago, a quiet exchange by the candle rack after Vespers. You never used it. You just liked having it. In a time when everything was monitored, even keeping a small token felt thrilling. Your spouse walks in with a basket of nettles, brushing their wrist along yours. It lingers a moment too long. Saint's Day, you ask. They shake their head. Your heart does a little cartwheel. And so, in the flickering light of the hearth, with the shutters drawn and the wind whispering through the chimney, you reclaim a moment of tenderness. Not because it's permitted, but because it's yours. The rains arrive by midday, turning the village paths into ankle-deep soup. Your cloak, never particularly waterproof, clings to you like a damp sheep. You squelch toward the church anyway, because it's confession day, and everyone's pretending they're not interested in who's saying what behind that velvet curtain. Inside, it smells of beeswax, mildew, and secrets. You kneel behind old Mathilda, who is absolutely confessing the same sins she confessed last week. Something about envy, something about Father Jerome's handsomeness, something about the candied figs she hid during Lent. But your thoughts drift, not to your own confession. No, you're remembering what happened last time you and your spouse kissed for too long in the garden shed. Technically, it was Tuesday, not a feast day, not a vigil, but it was a Tuesday, and some monks believed Tuesdays stirred impure spirits. Historians still argue whether this belief came from Roman superstition or local monastic crankiness. Either way, your knees are sore and your conscience unsure. You finally shuffle forward. Father Jerome clears his throat. You say, "Forgive me, I may have kissed too passionately on a weekday." There's a pause. He sighs, scribbles something with his quill, and says, 3 Hail Marys, and no peas till Friday. You blink. No peas. You nod solemnly. Outside, the rain continues. You stop at the tannery to pick up a repaired boot and nearly trip over a dog. It's chewing what looks like someone's discarded love letter, sloppy ink, torn edge, a faint trace of rose oil. Probably meant for the Reeves' daughter, now headed for the compost. You return home, boot in hand, and find your spouse sitting at the table with a book. Not reading it, just hiding a small pastry inside it like a very pious snack smuggler. Confession, they ask. You nod. They offer a bite. And here's the thing. Medieval guilt was exhausting. It wrapped itself around you like layers of wet wool. But people still found ways to shrug it off. A shared joke. A wink behind a prayer. A stolen kiss on the wrong day with the right person. You eat the pastry. And for a moment, all is forgiven. It's nearing dusk now, and the village has that golden hush where chimney smoke curls like soft ribbons into the gray sky, and even the hens seem contemplative. You're trudging back from the stream, pail in hand, when you pass the blacksmith's apprentice whispering something to the cooper's niece. Whatever it is, it's not about barrels. You don't linger. Gossip in this village travels faster than fleas. Still, your mind turns to the codes people use. Because outright flirting, that could land you in the bishop's bad books, or worse, the town's collective, eyebrow-raising disapproval. So instead, affection hides in the margins, a sprig of thyme tucked into a satchel, a red thread tied to a fence post, a candle left burning just a little too long. Historians still argue whether these folk gestures were superstition, subtle rebellion, or both. But they worked if you knew how to read them. You recall a time when someone left a carved bit of driftwood near your doorstep, shaped vaguely like a heart, or possibly a shoe. Either way, it made your stomach do a strange little jig. You walk on, passing the old spinster who keeps bees and mutters charms under her breath. She once told you that sharing honey on Midsummer's Eve ensures a fertile union. You didn't ask for clarification. At home, your spouse is mending a tear in your sleeve. The needle moves with the same precision they use when chopping leeks and delivering verbal side eyes to nosy neighbors. You sit beside them and mention the apprentice and the cooper's niece. About time, they murmur. She's been making him flower crowns since Pentecost. You both smile, because here, in this little cottage where love is soft and survival is loud, you've learned that the heart is a sly creature. It doesn't shout, it nudges, it endures, even when it's wrapped in wool and rules. And tonight, as the fire pops and your toes thaw, you whisper a thank you to time, to thread, to the unspoken things that somehow speak the loudest. The bell tolls for curfew, low and slow, as the sun finally sinks behind the woods. You bolt the door and draw the shutters, not because you fear bandits, but because Sister Hildegard makes surprise rounds with a lantern and an iron frown. After dark is when mischief stirs, or so she says. You settle near the hearth. Dinner is thin porridge and slightly heroic cheese. Your spouse adds a few herbs to make it taste like less of a punishment. Outside, owls begin their slow, ponderous wail. You sigh, because now, at this hour, you remember how even the beds had rules. Married couples, especially the pious sort, were expected to abstain during Lent, Advent, fast days, feast days, the night before communion. And just for good measure, any time a relic passed through town. Basically, if the saints were watching, keep your knees to yourself. Historians still argue whether all these prohibitions were widely followed or mostly ignored with a wink and a strategically creaky floorboard. But the pressure was real. Even newlyweds found themselves navigating a spiritual obstacle course. You glance at the wooden bed frame. It creaks if you so much as breathe too heavily. No wonder so many lovers risked barns and bakehouses. Instead, privacy was a luxury, not a right. Still, inside your shared room, there's tenderness. Not scandal, not shame, just the brushing of fingers as your spouse hands you a cup of warm cider, a whispered joke about how Saint Barnabas always looks like he's judging, a soft laugh that melts the weight of curfews and clerics. You remember hearing tales of couples who carved small symbols under their bedposts, tiny hearts, initials, or prayers for fertility. Some used runes. Others just notched the wood each year they stayed together. Yours has 5, notched with a knife once used for turnips. Very romantic. You climb into bed. The wind taps gently at the shutters, and as the fire dies to embers and the village hum quiets to nothing, you feel something rare and steady, love, not in spite of the rules, but quietly surviving under them. Like a wildflower growing through cobblestones, you wake before dawn to the bleat of sheep and the smell of damp wool. Morning again. But not just any morning, it's St. Agnes Day, which means 2 things, cold feet and quiet superstition. Your spouse is already up, pouring grain into the chicken trough, muttering something about a dream. You know what kind of dream. Because on the eve of St. Agnes' Day, tradition said young women could see their future husbands if they slept with a sprig of rosemary under their pillow and fasted all day. You never fasted. You just dreamed of stew. Still, your cousin swore it worked. Claimed she saw her betrothed in a dream. He was blurry, yes, and possibly holding a turnip. But within the year, she was married to the baker's son. Coincidence, maybe, or maybe the turnip was prophetic. Historians still argue whether these rituals were holdovers from pagan rites or simply folk fun wrapped in saintly robes. But either way, the medieval mind was always reaching, stretching for meaning in dreams, signs, and the way someone folded your laundry just a little too tenderly. At market, the talk is all about whose dream came true, who cheated by nibbling bread after sunset, and whether Agnes favors brunettes. You buy a round of stale bread and pretend not to eavesdrop. Back home, your spouse presents you with a single rosemary twig, tied with red thread. You blink. For your pillow, they say, trying not to smile. You place it there, beneath the rough linen. Later, when the fire's out, and the only light is the silver sheen of moon through shutters, you lie very still, waiting to dream. You don't see a stranger. You see the same warm eyes across the hearth, the same hand reaching for yours in sleep. Maybe the ritual works after all. Or maybe the best visions don't need saints, rosemary, or prophecy. Just someone who stays, even when the rules say they shouldn't. Rain again. Because of course it is. The kind that seeps through your hood, down your collar, and into the hems of your thoughts. You shuffle down the muddy lane, heading to the midwife's cottage, not for a child, but for clove tincture and possibly gossip. She greets you with a grunt and an herbal steam that smells like something between salvation and stew. You sit on a three-legged stool as she stirs something alarming in a copper pot. On the wall behind her, herbs hang like holy relics, mugwort for dreams, yarrow for wounds, and a little patch of silphium. Except that's impossible. Silphium's been extinct since Roman times. Still, the midwife swears by it, or at least by whatever cousin plant she found growing near the latrine. You ask, cautiously, about love potions. She laughs so hard her cat leaves the room. Love's not something you boil, she says, wiping her hands. But people try. They always try. Historians still argue whether medieval love potions worked through actual herbs or just heavy suggestion. Many recipes included wine, honey, and a dash of wishful thinking. One even listed powdered toad's heart, though it's unclear whether that was symbolic or just enthusiastic. You leave with a bottle of something smoky and a warning not to drink it near candles. At home, your spouse eyes the bottle. What's this, you say? Midwife says it's for affection. They raise an eyebrow. So is cleaning the dishes. You both laugh. Later that night, you pour a drop into 2 chipped cups of cider and clink them gently. It tastes like regret and cinnamon. But there's warmth in the way you both pretend it's working, in the shared performance, in the act of trying together. Because sometimes love is less about sparks and more about ritual, about raising a cup, about sipping something strange, and choosing again to be here. The fare arrives with little warning, like a traveling sneeze. By midday, the village green is a muddle of tents, tinkers, fiddlers, and moral compromise. You slip past a juggler dressed like St. George, though his dragon looks suspiciously like a sack of flour tied with twine. Your spouse insists you buy a ribbon blue for loyalty. You opt for green just to be cheeky. Among the stalls, there's a woman selling love charms carved into bone. Another hawks perfumed handkerchiefs, promising they'll attract suitors, or at least keep goats away. One booth offers eternal affection in the form of a single boiled egg wrapped in cloth. Historians still argue whether these charms were rooted in Celtic tradition, local folklore, or just brisk marketing. But fairs have always been places where desire is sold behind disguise. You watch a group of young lovers toss pebbles into a well. Legend says, if they sink in silence, love is certain. If they plink too loudly, doom. You toss one too. It hits the water with a noise like a disappointed ant. Your spouse shrugs. Well, we made it this far. You pass a puppet show halfway through a morality tale. The devil tempts a knight with a barmaid and a bottle. The crowd cheers for the barmaid. You do too. Later, you find a quiet patch beneath a walnut tree. Your spouse is weaving two blades of grass together, tight at first, then loose. You remember our first fare? They ask. You nod. The one where you both ate too many fried apples and accidentally insulted a bishop's horse. Back then, love felt like urgency. Now, it feels like ease. You lean your head on their shoulder. Above, the clouds scatter like gossip. A fiddler plays something wistful. And you realize love doesn't always need omens, potions, or patron saints. Sometimes it just needs a place to sit, a ribbon in your pocket, and someone who never minds the plink. The wind has changed. You can smell it, apples just beginning to brown, damp leaves underfoot, and that first quiet promise of frost. Autumn has arrived, and with it, the harvest dances. You and your spouse join the others in the barn-turned ballroom. Lanterns sway from beams, casting shadows that dance faster than the guests. A fiddler stands on a cider barrel, stomping time with muddy boots. His grin is missing 2 teeth and 1 moral compass. You're both terrible dancers, which is half the fun. Still, harvest time isn't all spinning skirts and mashed toes. This season has always been deeply tied to fertility, not just of the soil, but of the people. Entire rituals, some now lost to time and translation, celebrated unions of body and land. Historians still argue whether the old plowman rites were symbolic or literal. Some villages whispered of couples lying in fields under the moon to bless the earth. Others say that's nonsense, and that the only thing most people harvested was blisters. Back inside, the baker's daughter is caught slipping a garland of wheat into the stable boy's cloak. Not subtle. The room erupts in cheers. Your spouse leans in, amused. Remember when I gave you barley in your boot? You do. It itched for days, but you married them anyway. There's a moment in the dance, just a moment where the fiddler slows, and the room hushes beneath the soft scrape of feet. You and your spouse move as if remembering something your bodies knew before words did. It doesn't last. Someone trips into a pickle barrel. But in that fleeting hush, there was a kind of vow, ancient, wordless, and wildly out of rhythm. Later, walking home under a sky full of stars, you trail behind just a little, watching your spouse's silhouette in the moonlight. And you think, yes, even now, after all the seasons, after all the itchy barley and clumsy steps, this dance still fits. Snow arrives not with a bang, but a breath, soft flakes drifting like ash, settling into every crack and cranny of the village. The world muffles itself. Sounds become secrets. You're mending a tear in your spouse's cloak by the fire, fingers stiff with cold. They're boiling parsnips, your least favorite vegetable, but the only one left with dignity in the cellar. Winter in a medieval village isn't romantic. It's survival. And yet, strangely, this is when love proves itself. You sleep in wool socks and shared breath. You take turns checking on the fire, on the roof, on each other's coughs. Romance isn't a rose in snow. It's hauling water through slush so the other can sleep an hour longer. Still, some found ways to spark warmth. There were customs around Twelfth Night when roles reversed, and women could propose to men. A few records hint at cross-dressing dances, mischief, and declarations, whispered behind barns. Historians still argue whether Twelfth Night was liberating, or just a temporary illusion of choice. But for many, it was the only day they could step outside their assigned script. You once dressed as a shepherd and proposed to your spouse in the pigsty. They said yes through a snort. Today, you just give them a piece of bread shaped like a heart. It's burnt. They pretend it's perfect. Later, as the wind howls and shutters rattle, you both huddle under furs that smell like every beast you've ever owned. The fire's gone low. The stew tastes like punishment, but there's laughter and the comfort of someone knowing exactly how many beans are left. You fall asleep tangled together like old rope. Outside, snow covers the garden where you once carved your initials into a turnip. Come spring, you'll carve them again. But for now, this stillness is enough. There's a knock at the door, not a visitor, just the wind again, playing tricks with the latch. Still, it startles you both, and you laugh as your spouse mutters something unrepeatable about spirits and drafty hinges. But in the Middle Ages, such sounds weren't always dismissed. The line between love and the supernatural was thin, like linen worn too many seasons. Ghosts of old lovers, banshees shrieking warnings, saints whispering in dreams, all fair game when the heart was involved. One woman claimed her late husband returned as a raven, cawing mournfully at her window each morning. Another swore that a candle fell over every time she thought impure thoughts. Spoiler, she had very clumsy candles. Historians still argue whether these tales were sincere beliefs or subtle rebellions against the silence expected of grieving women. Either way, love had its afterlife. You remember, as a child, watching a widow light a lamp every night for her departed, not in mourning, but as a chat. She'd sit beside it, whispering her day, the living and the dead keeping company softly. Tonight, you and your spouse light your own lamp, not for the dead, but for the darkness. Its glow flickers on the beams, dances on the spoon as you stir soup. The kind of glow that makes wrinkles look poetic and soup taste warmer than it is. There's something sacred in the way your spouse hums while drying herbs, in the way their hands still find yours beneath the table. You think of that widow again, how she once said, "Love doesn't leave, it just changes where it sits." Tonight, it sits here, between two bowls of leek broth, beside a crooked latch and a lamp that refuses to go out. Even if ghosts knock, they'd be jealous. The frost has finally lifted, and the ground, though still stubborn, has begun to yield. You and your spouse take a walk past the chapel, not out of piety, but because the wild violets have begun to bloom around the stone foundation. You stop beside a carved inscription, faded and half-eaten by moss. It's a memorial to a couple who died a century ago, names barely legible. Still, someone, likely the baker's youngest, has left a small braid of daisies beneath it. Love echoes here. Marriage in the Middle Ages was rarely about romance, but that didn't stop people from finding it anyway. Many unions were arranged by families, sealed with a sheep or a jug of ale, and yet, against the odds, people still found ways to like each other. Historians still argue whether medieval couples found companionship or merely endured it. But court records show glimpses, cases of husbands defending wives from scorn, wives sneaking honey to husbands in the stocks, and occasionally heartfelt pleas for annulments because of snoring. You smile as your spouse points out a new nest in the chapel eaves. Hope the birds aren't arguing, they joke. You remember your first real argument, something absurd, like spoons or socks. The kind of argument that ends with silence, then bread, then a hesitant shoulder touch. Love isn't the absence of disagreement. It's learning how to bicker without breaking. Later, back at home, you pass the wooden box where you've saved the old letters. Bits of parchment folded into corners of your life. Some are stained with wax, others with soup. A few simply say, "I miss you," even when you were both in the same room. You read one aloud. Your spouse rolls their eyes, but they're smiling. The seasons turn, the violets bloom, and love, like moss, finds cracks to grow in. The bell tolls once for dusk, then silence. You sit together outside, wrapped in a blanket that's older than most of your memories. A pot of tea steams beside you, too strong, slightly bitter, exactly how your spouse likes it. The air smells of earth and wood smoke. In the distance, a dog barks once, then thinks better of it. The village is asleep, or nearly, but the stars are scandalously awake. You talk about nothing, the way people do when everything has already been said. The chickens, the Thatcher's misfortune, how the moon tonight looks like it's trying too hard. Then your spouse, suddenly thoughtful, asks, "Do you think we did it right? Not life, not work, love." You look at them, not as they were, not even as they are, but as they've become. The sum of every laugh, every argument, every patch sewn and letter scribbled and candle lit. The hand that still finds yours in the dark. Historians still argue whether love in the Middle Ages was truly tender or just necessity in disguise. But sitting here now, with the tea cooling and the world quiet, it hardly matters. Because you know how your love feels and that it was real. It is. Your spouse chuckles. That's a yes then. You squeeze their hand. The bell doesn't toll again. The night deepens. And together, you sit and wait for the stars to blink. So now, dear listener, let your breath slow. The tale has drawn to a close, not with a flourish, but with a whisper. Let the last images of candlelight and cold fingers and violets in bloom curl softly in your thoughts. You've wandered through seasons of affection, through arguments and dances, through letters stained with soup and hearts shaped from bread. You've walked where love grew not in grand declarations, but in the tiny, often ridiculous corners of life, corners where shoes get wet, and people say things they don't mean, but come back anyway. Let your body feel heavy now, like furs piled high on a wooden bed. Let your mind drift, not backwards, but in circles, like smoke above a hearth or gossip in a market square. The past may be gone, but the feelings, the awkward, sweet, maddening mess of it all remain, etched into time like initials carved in a turnip. Glorious, fleeting, and oddly persistent. So let yourself fade, just a little. Let the quiet take you. You're safe, you're warm. And if you dream, may it be of old dances, crooked smiles, and the kind of love that snores a little. Good night.